They laughed the second she said her call sign. Called her a Pokemon. A joke. Then, at 15,000 feet, her engine exploded, and the same men who mocked her went dead silent as her voice cracked through the radio, "I have the aircraft." What happened next, no one at that base ever forgot. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. 0600 hours. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and cologne, the way it always did before a big exercise. Red Flag was underway, the largest, most brutal air combat training exercise in the world, where squadrons from 3 different countries came to find out who was actually good and who just talked a good game. First Lieutenant Elena Voss stood near the back wall, arms crossed, watching pilots file in. She was small, 5'4" in her boots, with pale blonde hair scraped into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She wore no patches beyond her name tape and rank. No squadron nickname stitched anywhere. To the room full of veteran fighter jocks, she looked like an admin officer who'd wandered in by mistake. Lieutenant Colonel Frank "Bulldog" Reyes ran the roster call from the podium, rattling off names and tail numbers with the bored efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. When he got to the new transfer, he squinted at his clipboard. Voss, Elena. Transferred in from Edwards. Says here your call sign request is. He paused, reading it twice like it might change. Falcon. The room went quiet for exactly 1 second. Then Captain Danny Ruiz, a broad-shouldered instructor pilot with a reputation for being the loudest voice in any room, barked out a laugh that set off half the squadron. Falcon, Ruiz repeated, grinning at the pilot next to him. That's not a call sign, sweetheart, that's a Pokemon. More laughter rippled through the rows. Someone in the back made a bird screech noise. Reyes didn't stop it. In this world, hazing a new arrival was practically doctrine. How you handled the room told everyone whether you belonged in it. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't blush, didn't smile nervously, didn't offer an explanation. She simply looked at Ruiz with an expression so flat and unreadable that his grin faltered slightly before he covered it with another chuckle. Just Falcon, she said quietly. Her voice barely carried, which somehow made the room lean in to hear it, and made the mockery feel suddenly, faintly ridiculous. Reyes cleared his throat and moved the briefing along. Today's exercise, a 4-ship of F-16s escorting a high-value simulated tanker asset through contested airspace, defending against aggressor jets flying out of the adversary squadron. Ruiz would lead as Vandal 1. His wingman, Captain Mike "Chains" Delgado, would fly Vandal 2. Elena was assigned Vandal 4, tail end slot, the position reserved for the pilot the flight leader trusts least. As the room broke for the gear lockers, Ruiz bumped past her deliberately, shoulder first. Try to keep the jet pointed the right way today, Falcon. Red Flag isn't flight school. Elena said nothing. She adjusted the zipper on her G-suit and walked toward the life support room, and if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed that her hands were completely steady, steadier, in fact, than anyone else's in that locker room. What none of them knew was that 18 months earlier, over a stretch of contested desert 11,000 miles from Nevada, Elena Voss had flown an experimental strike variant through a surface-to-air missile engagement that should have killed her twice. She'd taken hydraulic damage, lost half her flight controls, and brought a crippled jet home on manual reversion alone, a feat that 2 separate test pilots had since told her, flatly, was not supposed to be survivable. The program was still classified. Her squadron file said nothing beyond prior special testing assignment. The callsign Falcon had been given to her not by friends ribbing her over a mistake, but by an engineering team who'd watched her thread a dying aircraft through impossible odds and decided that no other word fit. She didn't need Ruiz's respect. She needed a jet that flew straight. 2 hours into the mission, the 4 F-16s were holding high over the range in a loose formation, running a simulated combat air patrol while the mock tanker orbited below. The exercise had gone smoothly, a few simulated missile shots traded back and forth, nothing serious. Ruiz kept up a steady stream of chatter on the tactical frequency, mostly aimed at reminding everyone he was in charge. Vandal 4, tighten it up. You're flying like you're saving gas for a road trip. Copy, Elena replied, her tone as level as still water. Then the jet bucked. It wasn't loud at first, just a hard, wrong shudder that ran up through the control stick and into her right hand. Elena's eyes snapped to the engine instruments. RPM was fluctuating wildly, oscillating in a pattern that had no business existing in a healthy turbofan. She had exactly 1 second to register the word surge before the compressor gave up entirely. The bang that followed wasn't dramatic in the movie sense, it was worse. A short, violent concussion that rattled her teeth and was immediately followed by a deep, grinding vibration as the single engine that kept her F-16 in the sky began tearing itself apart from the inside. Fire warning light. Then hydraulic warning. Then a cascade of amber and red filling her instrument panel like a Christmas tree gone wrong. Vandal 4, talk to me. Ruiz's voice cracked over the radio, all the swagger gone in an instant. He'd banked hard to look back and seen the thick trail of black smoke pouring from her jet. Inside the cockpit, Elena's world had narrowed to pure procedure. Single-engine fighter, single point of failure. If this engine failed catastrophically, there was no backup thrust waiting in reserve like a twin-engine jet. She had glide, altitude, and about 90 seconds of decision-making before either she landed this thing or she didn't. Engine fire, right, correction, only engine, she reported, her voice utterly level even as the jet yawned hard beneath her. Pulling throttle to idle, cutting fuel flow to the failed engine. Falcon, eject, Ruiz shouted. You have one engine and it just came apart, there's nothing left to fly that jet with. Negative, Elena said. I have altitude. I have glide range. I am not punching out over the range with a perfectly gliding airframe under me. Delgado's voice cut in, panicked. She doesn't have thrust, bulldog, she can't just. I know how a Viper glides, chains, Elena said calmly, and something about the sheer flatness of her voice made both men go quiet. I flew dead stick approaches at Edwards for 11 months. Clear my airspace and give me room to work. The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds, an eternity on a combat frequency. An F-16 without engine power doesn't fall out of the sky. It glides, badly, steeply, but predictably, if the pilot understands exactly how much altitude buys how much distance. Elena ran the math in her head with the same cold precision she'd have used on a checklist. 15,000 feet. Best glide speed, roughly 200 knots. A ratio she'd memorized years ago and never expected to need outside a simulator. Nellis lay behind her, too far. But there was an emergency divert strip, an old auxiliary field cut into the desert specifically for exactly this kind of nightmare, built decades ago and rarely used. She'd studied it during her transfer briefing, the way she studied everything, without anyone noticing. Range control, Vandal 4 requesting vector to Coyote auxiliary strip, she called. Single engine failure, flameout, gliding, negative thrust. The range controller's voice came back thin with disbelief. Vandal 4, Coyote strip is unmanned, no crash crew on station. Copy, no crash crew. Give me the heading. Ruiz's F-16 slid in off her left wing, close enough that she could see his face through both canopies, white and rigid with fear. Falcon, listen to me. That strip is 11 miles of nothing. If you're short on energy you land in rock and sagebrush at 200 knots. Then I won't be short, Elena said. Watch my wing. Call my altitude. I need eyes, not opinions, bulldog. Something in her voice, the complete absence of panic, the total command of a hopeless situation, made Ruiz do the one thing he hadn't done all day, shut up and listen. Altitude 8,000, 5 miles to the field, he called out instead, his voice steadying into the clipped rhythm of a man falling back on training. "You're high. Hold your bank, hold your bank." Elena's hands moved with total economy, working the stick and rudder to bleed altitude without bleeding the precious airspeed she'd need to flare. The desert floor rushed up in silence, no engine roar now, just wind hissing over the canopy and the low hum of instruments running on battery power alone. 3,000 feet, 3 miles, Ruiz called. "Strips dead ahead, I have it visual." "Copy, gear down." Elena reached for the handle. 3 hydraulic starve thunks told her the gear had extended on backup pressure. She wouldn't know if they'd locked until she felt the weight come onto the wheels. 1,000 feet, Ruiz said, his voice tight. "You're a little fast." "I know," Elena said. "I need the energy. Watch me." The old runway materialized out of the shimmering heat, a gray ribbon slashed through empty desert, no lights, no tower, no fire trucks, nothing but concrete and silence waiting for her. She flared the dead jet with the last of her airspeed, holding the nose just off the deck, feeling the aircraft settle in that terrifying half-second where gravity and lift argue over who wins. The main gear touched first, a hard, jarring impact that rattled her spine, followed by the nose gear a heartbeat later. No thrust to correct with, no power to go around if anything went wrong. She stood on the brakes, easing them just short of lockup, guiding a 40,000-pound glider down 11,000 feet of cracked pavement using nothing but momentum and nerve. The jet rolled to a stop with almost 1,000 feet of runway to spare. For a moment, there was nothing but the tick of cooling metal and the wind moving sand across the empty strip. "Vandal 4 is down," Elena said, her voice, impossibly, still flat. "Aircraft is stopped. No fire. I'm going to need a tow." By the time Ruiz and Delgado landed back at Nellis and drove the 2 hours out to Coyote Strip, Elena was sitting on the boarding ladder of her dead jet, helmet in her lap, drinking water from a thermos some range technician had handed her. She looked exactly as unbothered as she had that morning in the briefing room. Ruiz walked up slowly. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at the jet, the scorched engine bay, the streaked black soot trailing back from the exhaust, the sheer improbability of the whole thing sitting intact in the desert instead of scattered across 3 miles of sagebrush. 11 months of dead stick landings at Edwards, Ruiz finally said. "That's not something you put on a normal transfer packet." "It's not a normal program," Elena said simply. He sat down on the ladder rung below her, quiet for once in his life. "I called you a Pokemon this morning." "You did." "I'm an idiot." The faintest hint of a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "You're not the first person to underestimate a call sign, Bulldog. You won't be the last." Ruiz let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he looked out over the empty runway that had just saved her life, and, in its own way, saved his pride too. "Falcon," he said, testing the word again, differently this time. "Yeah. That tracks." The squadron never laughed at her call sign again. They didn't need to. They'd seen exactly what it meant to fly like one.